were moments when I was resentful. There were moments when I was mad. There were moments when I didn't feel like I got enough attention.
Michelle Obama has vanished from key public events. Her speeches have turned bitter, and rumors about a broken marriage are exploding across D.C. circles. Now, Megyn Kelly has leaked what might be the Obamas' most closely guarded secret, and it changes everything. From cryptic comments about a bad decade in marriage to whispers about separate lives and a shocking Hollywood connection, this isn't the Michelle you thought you knew. Is she hiding a scandal or preparing for something even bigger? You're about to find out. The public darling or carefully crafted persona? Michelle Obama is not who you think she is. For years, we've been fed a polished, perfect image. First lady, best-selling author, role model, icon. But behind that smile and smooth delivery, something's off. In her latest public appearances, the woman once dubbed America's conscience sounds tired, bitter, even lost. What happened to the Michelle who inspired millions with one word, hope? What's driving her growing frustration with the very country that put her on a pedestal? And most importantly, what's the secret Megyn Kelly just leaked that could blow this whole image wide open? From the moment she stepped onto the national stage, Michelle Obama was treated as more than just a political spouse. The media adored her. She was Harvard-educated, stylish, poised, and articulate. Her speeches were carefully curated to appeal across party lines, soft enough to feel personal, strong enough to sound presidential. Magazines couldn't get enough of her. TV anchors gushed over her intelligence and relatability. And her 2018 memoir, Becoming, sold over 14 million copies, making it one of the best-selling autobiographies of all time. Even after leaving the White House, she remained a dominant force, headlining sold-out tours, launching Netflix projects, and being floated by some as a future presidential candidate. But lately, the tone has shifted, and not just in the press, but in her own words. During a recent speech, Michelle delivered a striking line. "We don't get to change the rules, so we always win." On the surface, it sounds like a call for fairness. But dig deeper, and there's an edge to it, a resentment that seems to go beyond politics. In another moment, she said that most Americans will never benefit from the affirmative action of generational wealth, and that if they choke in a crisis, they don't get a second chance. This isn't just realism, it's personal. And it left many wondering, is this the same woman who once told us, "When they go low, we go high"? Why is Michelle, someone who seemingly has it all, power, money, global influence, so disillusioned? Some say she's simply telling hard truths, but the timing is curious. As the Biden-Harris administration struggles with record-low approval ratings, rising inflation, and internal party division, Michelle's words feel like more than just reflection. They sound like a distancing, like someone trying to pull away from a ship she no longer wants to steer. It's also worth asking, when did this shift begin? Back during Barack Obama's presidency, Michelle was often his emotional anchor. Her speeches focused on unity, optimism, family, and progress. She talked about military families, healthy eating, education, and opportunity. Her role was clear. She wasn't elected, but she brought the heart. But even back then, there were moments of tension beneath the surface. Remember when she said, "For the first time in my adult life, I am really proud of my country," only after her husband was nominated for president? Critics called it ungrateful. Supporters said it was misunderstood. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, it sounds less like a one-off and more like a window into a long-held bitterness. And that bitterness is starting to show. More than once in recent months, Michelle has hinted at deep dissatisfaction, not just with politics, but with public life, and perhaps even with her own role in it. She's spoken about how hope is hard, how people are tired, and how the system is still failing those who look like her. These aren't the words of someone content with the progress she once championed. They're the words of someone who feels trapped in the very system she once helped build. So, is this just Michelle being honest? Or is she unraveling? What happens when a public figure builds an image so carefully, so strategically, that even the smallest crack becomes a headline? Megyn Kelly's bombshell, the secret she let slip. This is the moment that shook even the most loyal Obama supporters. In a move that nobody saw coming, Megyn Kelly just dropped what might be the biggest red flag yet about Michelle Obama. According to Kelly, what's been hiding behind Michelle's carefully constructed image is something deeply personal and potentially explosive. Could one of the most powerful marriages in modern politics be quietly falling apart? And more importantly, has it already started? Let's back up and get into what was actually said. On a recent episode of The Megyn Kelly Show, the former Fox News host, who's built a career on confronting powerful figures without blinking, referenced what she described as serious rumors from reputable people about Michelle and Barack Obama's marriage. Let's be clear, this isn't just internet chatter. According to Kelly, rumors about the Obamas' separation have been circulating amongst media insiders and serious journalists in Washington and New York. The kind of people who don't repeat things unless they have good reason. Kelly's words were pointed. I've been hearing this from people I trust, people who are not in the business of making things up. Something is going on between the Obamas. She went on to reference a pattern that's becoming harder to ignore. Specifically, Michelle's increasingly visible absences from major public events, and Barack's strangely solo presence at moments where the couple would typically appear side by side. When Kelly says this might be a political earthquake in the making, she's not exaggerating. One of the biggest red flags was Michelle Obama's absence from former President Jimmy Carter's funeral. This wasn't a minor occasion. It was a defining moment for the Democratic Party. Every living former president was either present or sent an immediate, high-profile representative. Michelle, according to her team, had a scheduling conflict, but when pressed for details, no further details were offered. And for someone of Michelle's prominence, silence can be deafening. Then there's the equally conspicuous absence from Donald Trump's inauguration back in January 2017. Now, it's true that several high-profile Democrats chose not to attend, but Michelle's absence carried more emotional weight. Not only did she refuse to appear, but she also made zero public comments about it in the days that followed. And again, there were no alternative obligations offered, just a quiet, pointed refusal to participate. At the time, many chalked it up to political protest. But in hindsight, when placed alongside these recent disappearances and the tone of her speeches, it feels like something else entirely, something fractured. Now, Kelly wasn't the only one hinting at behind-the-scenes drama. Journalist and Substack writer Jessica Reed Krause, better known in some circles as House in Habit, posted her own claims earlier this year that add fuel to the fire. According to her sources, rumors of a deepening rift between Michelle and Barack have been quietly circulating in Los Angeles and New York social circles for over a year. But it was Michelle's no-show at Carter's funeral that reportedly convinced insiders that the situation might be worse than expected. In a post that has since gone viral, Krause said, "It's no longer a question of if, it's a question of when." She's not just speculating that there's tension, She's suggesting the divorce is inevitable. And then came the most bizarre twist of all. According to multiple unverified but widely circulated messages, Michelle Obama's alleged distancing from Barack may involve someone outside politics entirely. Actress Jennifer Aniston, the Friends star, Hollywood, a lister and staple of American pop culture. The rumor goes that Barack has been linked to Aniston in certain elite circles. And while the details are sketchy at best, the name keeps coming up in connection with private events and quiet conversations in New York and Los Angeles. One insider reportedly told Krause via direct message, "He's with Jennifer Aniston. My old manager knows it. It's not a secret in her inner circle." To be clear, Jennifer Aniston has publicly denied the rumor, saying, "I don't even know him. I've seen Michelle more than I've seen Barack." But that hasn't stopped the whispers. We still don't know the full truth. But the fact that this kind of claim is being taken seriously by veteran journalists and political insiders is shocking enough. Here's the question that should be on everyone's mind. Why is this coming out now? If there's trouble in the Obama marriage, it's not just a personal matter, it's political. Michelle Obama remains one of the most trusted and beloved figures among Democratic voters. She polls higher than virtually any other public figure in the party, including Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. If she's truly pulling away from Barack, or if there's a rupture behind the scenes, the fallout could reshape the entire Democratic strategy heading into 2024, especially if she's being floated as a potential candidate herself. And let's not forget the strategic social media moves that have added to the speculation. When Barack posted a photo for Michelle's birthday earlier this year, eagle-eyed followers noticed something off. The photo wasn't flattering. Michelle appeared distant, head wrapped in a kerchief, sitting far from Barack. He, by contrast, was grinning, bright, polished, completely in frame. Was this just an awkward picture? Maybe. Or maybe it was a carefully calculated attempt to project normalcy when things behind the scenes are anything but. This brings us back to Megyn Kelly's central point. The cracks are showing. Whether it's in Michelle's distant public behavior, Barack's forced displays of unity, or the sudden rush of behind-the-scenes speculation, something no longer adds up. And this isn't being pushed by gossip blogs or clickbait tabloids. It's coming from political insiders, major broadcast voices, and experienced reporters. Could it all be smoke without fire? Possibly. But in Washington, D.C., smoke always means something's burning, even if it's still behind closed doors. The hope cracks. Her speech, no one is talking about. Michelle Obama took the stage recently and delivered what some are calling her most powerful speech in years, but not for the reasons you'd expect. Beneath the carefully chosen words and polished delivery, something slipped through. A tone of defeat, a deep frustration, and possibly even an intentional break from the political machine she once loyally served. It wasn't the soaring, feel-good rhetoric she's famous for. This was something else, something darker, something that sounded a lot like surrender. Why would one of the most admired and privileged women in the world, a Harvard graduate, a global celebrity, a former First Lady, stand before an adoring crowd and sound so hopeless? The line that set off alarm bells came midway through her speech. Most of us don't get to fail forward. The audience cheered, but the message underneath was anything but triumphant. It was bitter. It was aimed. And it wasn't subtle. Michelle wasn't just making a vague observation about inequality in America. She was sending a direct signal about how she sees the system and who she believes benefits unfairly from it. The irony, of course, is that Michelle Obama is arguably one of the clearest examples of someone who has absolutely failed forward, or more precisely, been propelled upward by forces far beyond merit alone. And yet, here she was, speaking not as an insider, but as a woman wronged, as someone trapped, someone resentful. So what was she really saying? Let's unpack it, because the subtext in this speech is layered. On the surface, she was praising Vice President Kamala Harris for her grasp of systemic inequality, calling her someone who understands that most of us don't get to choke in a crisis and then get a second or third chance. But the phrasing didn't sound like celebration. It sounded like a warning, a lament. And when you consider Kamala Harris's actual political trajectory, failing to win a single primary, polling near the bottom nationally, and still being elevated to vice president, it's hard not to read Michelle's words as laced with double meaning. Is she sincerely praising Kamala's resilience, or is she reminding the public just how rigged the system has become? And here's where the contradiction really takes shape. Michelle is the product of elite American institutions. She went to Princeton, then Harvard Law School. She worked in high-paying legal and administrative roles before entering the White House. After 8 years as First Lady, she walked away with massive influence, multi-million-dollar book deals and media contracts. Her daughters attend top-tier schools, and her family travels in circles of extreme wealth and privilege. Yet, here she is, giving a speech that sounds like it came from someone who's been systematically shut out. She talks about people not having the chance to fail forward, but her husband failed forward repeatedly, from his short Illinois Senate tenure to a presidency many saw as built on optics more than substance. Kamala Harris failed upward. Even Michelle herself, with no elected office and no policy resume, is floated as a presidential contender. So who exactly is being denied the second chances? Michelle's framing of America as a place where justice only works for the rich and well-connected might resonate with some listeners, but the messenger undermines the message. And when someone who lives in multi-million-dollar mansions and travels by private jet talks about systemic disadvantage, the dissonance becomes impossible to ignore. But perhaps that's exactly the point. Because this speech, if you listen closely, is not really about Kamala or Trump or systemic barriers. It's about Michelle. It's about rebranding. It's about control. This might explain why she's begun distancing herself from the Biden-Harris administration. The speech had almost no mention of Joe Biden, an astonishing omission considering she was speaking at a party event meant to drum up support for the Democratic ticket. Instead of praising the sitting president or drawing attention to his accomplishments, she focused on systemic injustice, despair, and the absence of hope. She mentioned fear, division, hate, and then declared that hope is making a comeback. But it didn't feel convincing. It felt rehearsed, performed, hollow. And the truth is, it might not even be aimed at rallying voters at all. It might be aimed at re-establishing her independence. Because while Biden flounders in the polls and Harris's approval ratings remain underwater, Michelle is trying to carve a space that sets her apart. One where she isn't accountable for their failures, and where she can rewrite her image not as a party loyalist, but as a reluctant visionary. A savior who sees the system's flaws from the inside, not because she's part of it, but because she's somehow above it. It's a delicate balance, but politically, it's effective. She gets to stay in the limelight while separating herself from the crash. And that brings us to a much bigger question. Is Michelle Obama laying the groundwork for her own political narrative? One that distances her from Barack's legacy, from Biden's administration, and even from the Democratic establishment? There are signs. Her recent interviews have shifted tone dramatically. She talks about exhaustion, about bitterness, about how hard it is to always be the one who rises above. She hints at a country that still doesn't fully accept people like her, despite her unparalleled access and success. Her podcast delves into themes of long-term dissatisfaction, personal struggle, and emotional burnout. And her speeches now include the kinds of lines you don't hear from people preparing to endorse a failing incumbent. She's setting the stage. If Biden's popularity continues to slide, and if Kamala remains an unpopular face of the administration, the Democratic Party may start looking elsewhere for leadership. And Michelle, despite her many denials, would be at the top of that list. But if that moment comes, she doesn't want to be seen as part of the machine. She wants to be the outsider again, the fresh face, the honest voice, the woman who tried to stay out but couldn't ignore the pain of the people. For anyone paying attention, it's clear. The hope is cracking. And Michelle Obama may not be patching it up this time. She might be preparing to walk away from it altogether. Or, just maybe, to sell a new version of it, one that puts her at the center and leaves the rest of the Democratic Party behind. Behind closed doors, the Obama marriage in crisis. There's something deeply off about the Obamas lately, and everyone close to D.C. knows it. The marriage that once symbolized the American liberal elite's idea of perfection now looks increasingly fractured. Behind the warm smiles and polished family portraits is a growing wave of insider chatter. Rumors from Capitol Hill, political journalists, podcast hosts, even former staffers, pointing to emotional distance, conflicting lives, and a marriage held together more by legacy than love. It's not just speculation anymore. The cracks are public, the signals are visible, and Michelle herself is starting to let her frustration show. Why is one of the most admired women in the world openly talking about bad decades in a marriage? And how much longer can this facade hold? Let's start with what we know. For years, Michelle Obama has publicly praised the importance of communication, empathy, and mutual support in relationships. But more recently, her tone has shifted. In her own podcast, a project she launched with her brother, supposedly to give listeners insight into family dynamics and real-world relationships, Michelle dropped a line that sent shockwaves through listeners. In a long-term marriage, you're going to have a bad decade. 10 years of bad. Not a rough patch, not a difficult period, a full decade of unhappiness. And she said it with a casual confidence that made it clear this wasn't a hypothetical. It came from experience. To say that's a jarring thing for a former First Lady to admit is putting it mildly. But it wasn't the only red flag. In that same conversation, Michelle described her relationship with Barack as one defined by constant tension around schedules, emotional disconnect, and lack of compatibility in their day-to-day lives. She hinted that they don't communicate the same way, that they don't even keep the same hours. This is the man she's been married to for over 30 years, the man the media has painted as her rock. And yet her tone suggests a partnership running on obligation, not intimacy. Now contrast this with Barack Obama's public persona, always smiling, effortlessly charming, every word smooth, calculated, and well-delivered. Barack is the quintessential political performer. He makes speeches look easy, drops into interviews like he's still on the campaign trail, and rarely, if ever, shows signs of inner turmoil. He's the guy who shows up polished no matter what's happening behind the scenes. And that contrast may be precisely the problem. Because while he continues to ride the wave of admiration and charisma, Michelle is clearly grinding harder for recognition and getting less of the spotlight in return. This isn't a new dynamic either. There's been a long-standing tension around the way Barack seemed to become a global icon, while Michelle, despite being equally accomplished, was often relegated to the background. The media adored her, but always in a secondary role. First lady, supportive spouse, role model, but never quite the headliner. And for someone with Michelle's ambition, intellect, and public following, that shadow might have felt stifling. Insiders have long noted that Michelle's post-White House life seems oddly detached from Barack's. Separate projects, separate tours, separate book deals. Even their appearances together often feel staged, strategic rather than organic. Take Barack's recent birthday post to Michelle, for example. He shared a photo of the two of them sitting at what appeared to be an intimate dinner. But instead of radiating warmth, the image raised more questions than it answered. Michelle looked tired, dressed down, seated far from her husband, while Barack looked relaxed and radiant. He was the focus. She was in the background. Again. For couples in politics, image is everything. And when those images start to feel strained or disjointed, the speculation follows. That's exactly what we're seeing now. Jessica Reed Krause, a journalist with deep connections to political and entertainment circles, recently posted that rumors of a looming Obama separation have been quietly circulating for over a year. She's not talking about social media gossip. She's referring to direct messages from insiders at parties, high-profile gatherings, and even political fundraisers. According to her sources, it's not if, it's when. That's not a light claim, and it was quickly echoed by Megyn Kelly, who said that serious journalists have told her the same thing. Something is unraveling behind the scenes. What's even more striking is how consistent these claims are across different spheres. Political insiders say the Obamas live largely separate lives now, with Michelle rarely attending Barack's solo events and vice versa. Social media users have noticed that their recent photos together feel cold, infrequent, and heavily curated. And political analysts are starting to wonder aloud whether Michelle's recent speeches, marked by bitterness, hopelessness, and sharp critiques of American institutions, are not just aimed at the system, but at the man she once called the love of her life. There's a theory developing that Michelle resents how effortless Barack makes everything look. She's spent her life working, striving, managing. He seems to float. And while he's praised for every carefully crafted speech, Michelle has had to prove herself in every domain. When Barack stumbles, the public forgives him. When Michelle shows a hint of fatigue or frustration, she's criticized. Over time, that imbalance could eat away at anyone. Add to that the enormous pressure of being one half of the Democratic Party's power couple, and the strain becomes more than just personal. It becomes political. This is where things get even more complicated, because if their marriage really is in crisis, it doesn't just affect them. It affects the entire Democratic brand. The Obamas were always more than just a couple. They were a symbol of unity, of progress, of the so-called American dream. If that symbol fractures, it sends a message that can't be ignored. It weakens the emotional foundation many voters still cling to, especially as the Biden-Harris administration continues to struggle. And Michelle's increasingly separate identity, her podcast, her speech tone, her visible absence from major events, could be laying the groundwork for an independent political future. But would she do that without Barack by her side? For years, the public bought into the idea that the Obamas were unshakable. Turns out, that might not be the case. Hypocrisy, victimhood, and media protection. Michelle Obama wants you to believe she's still struggling. that despite her Ivy League education, her global fame, her multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Penguin Random House, and her role as First Lady of the United States, she's still an outsider, still marginalized, still fighting the system. But the real contradiction isn't in her rhetoric. It's in the enormous gap between her lived reality and the oppressed identity she continues to perform on stage. And it reveals far more about how the left manipulates victimhood for political advantage than it does about any actual injustice. In her recent speeches, Michelle has repeatedly returned to the theme of systemic inequality, talking about how most Americans don't get to fail forward, or how we're not afforded the grace of second chances. She praises Kamala Harris as someone who understands what it's like to choke in a crisis and be denied another shot. But the problem is, that's not Kamala's story. It's not Michelle's either. Michelle graduated from Princeton, then Harvard Law. She had a six-figure job at the University of Chicago Medical Center well before she entered the White House. And Kamala Harris? She failed to win a single Democratic primary, yet was still handed the vice presidency. These aren't examples of people locked out by the system. These are individuals elevated by it, again and again. So when Michelle positions herself as part of the us who suffer under unfair rules, who exactly is she referring to? Because it certainly isn't her children who attend elite schools, or her husband, who went from Illinois state senator to president in less than 5 years. The idea that the Obamas are underdogs is absurd on its face. Yet Michelle continues to speak from a place of grievance, not gratitude. What's more troubling is how she wields that grievance politically. Take her comments about Donald Trump's so-called black jobs remark. She framed it as not only offensive, but threatening, as if the former president was somehow mocking Black Americans instead of proposing policies to help them enter the workforce. The irony? Under Trump's administration, Black unemployment reached historically low levels before the pandemic hit. Meanwhile, under Biden, whom Michelle staunchly supports, job growth has been revised downward by over 800,000 positions in just one 12-month period. That's the worst statistical miss in over 15 years. But did Michelle mention that? No. She fixated on Trump's tone, not Biden's outcomes, because for her, language is more important than results, especially if that language can be used to label someone as a bigot. That's where the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. Michelle Obama frequently calls for respect, dignity, and empathy, but only for the people who agree with her politically. She condemns Trump's childish nicknames, yet has no problem accusing him of being a racist, a misogynist, and a con man in the same breath. When Republicans advocate for parental consent in gender-related medical procedures for minors, policies that mirror laws in many European countries, Michelle doesn't argue the specifics. She declares that they're demonizing children. That's not empathy. That's political gaslighting. And where is that same outrage when her own party falls short? Where was Michelle when Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan left American citizens behind and cost lives? Where was her empathy when working-class families saw inflation gut their savings and raise their grocery bills by double digits? Where was her outrage when cities under Democratic leadership became crime hotspots? The silence is telling. Because Michelle's political brand is not about holding power accountable. It's about defending one team, no matter the cost. Which brings us to a difficult but necessary question. Is Michelle Obama really interested in unity? Or is she interested in control? She often speaks about bridging divides, yet consistently frames the right as morally inferior. She says Americans need to come together, then immediately paints half the country as hateful, backwards, or dangerous. Her speeches offer no good faith engagement with conservative values, only scorn and condescension. And yet, the media eats it up. Because Michelle isn't just protected, she's insulated. Any critique of her is labeled sexist or racist before it even begins. That's how powerful her political shield has become. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.